During this session, you will learn more about the exam issues exempt organizations are facing with Kim Hudwardson, a National Tax Office partner located in our Minneapolis office. Kim, I've heard you mention that we are seeing a rise in the number of exempt organizations facing exam issues. Can you tell us a little bit more about these exam issues?
Absolutely, Kate. We definitely are seeing a rise in examinations, and I think there's a number of different things that are bringing that about. If we look nationally, some statistics that have come out from the IRS, they've actually done examinations about 6,100 organizations in 2017, which was actually even more than they initially planned. And when we look at the breakdown of those, we see them in a number of different areas. A number of those are coming with respect to employment tax issues. So the IRS is definitely focusing on the types of areas where exempt organizations may not be classifying people the right way, may not be paying the appropriate employment taxes. This type of area isn't unique to exempt organizations. I think that all types of organizations are seeing a rise in employment tax type issues, but it's definitely one of the areas that exempt organizations are seeing. We're also seeing a number of these with respect to newly formed organizations. About 3 years ago, the IRS changed the process for applying for tax-exempt status and developed a streamlined application, which made it much easier for organizations to apply for and obtain tax-exempt status. So they're going back and they're actually doing examinations of some of the organizations that receive that streamlined exemption to ensure that they actually are good organizations, that they actually should have gotten exemption, and that they're operating according to how they filled out that application. So this was something that came back from the exempt org industry, wanting to see just some review done to ensure that that streamlined process didn't streamline things too much. The other area that we're seeing a lot of examinations in is with respect to private inurement and types of situations where the assets of exempt organizations may be used for the benefit of individuals. This isn't a new area. It's one of the biggest places that the IRS has concerns with exempt organizations, but they're definitely taking a look at and trying to figure out if there's specific segments where there may be more of this happening, or if there's just some egregious type issues that are out there. And then the last place that I would say we're seeing a lot more examinations is in the healthcare arena. And this is specifically due to the 501R regulations that were passed as part of the Affordable Care Act. 501R requires exempt hospitals to comply with 4 requirements in order for them to maintain their tax-exempt status. And as part of these new requirements, the IRS was required to go in and test compliance. So we are seeing that they're in the process now of testing that compliance with those regulations. They're looking at approximately 1,000 organizations of hospitals each year. These types of reviews aren't necessarily examinations. In other words, an organization may not even know that the IRS is doing a check on them. So a lot of the work can be done kind of behind the scenes. And it's only if the IRS agent discovers that there's some discrepancies or some information that they're not able to obtain that the organization will actually get contacted for a full examination. So for instance, in 2017, there would have been about 1,200 of these compliance reviews done. 300 of those were referred to examination where the organization actually was contacted by the IRS.
Well, why do you think these exams are on the rise?
Well, partially because of legislation. So the examinations that we're seeing with respect to the hospitals, that was a requirement as part of legislation that these reviews needed to be done. And the requirements there were quite complex. There's a lot of detail that needed to go into them. So getting in compliance, a lot of hospitals just struggled with getting all of their T's crossed and their I's dotted. And because of that, when these reviews are happening, some of them are turning into the examinations. In the other areas, it's fairly normal to see examinations in the exempt organization area, but I do think there's definitely a shortage of resources throughout the IRS, but specifically in the exempt organization tax area. And because of that, I think there's been a bigger focus on using data to try to determine where are the biggest areas of risk and how can the IRS focus on those areas. So for example, most exempt organizations file a Form 990 tax return. The IRS has now developed a query system. So there's over 250 queries that are assigned to that Form 990 that would be kind of red flag type queries. So if an organization has certain things that jump out with respect to those queries that are being attached, that may be something that would trigger them for examination.
So what is the impact of some of these issues on organizations?
So obviously, in some cases, we're talking about additional tax. So if there's issues with respect to employment tax, it might be that the organization is going to have additional tax they have to pay. With respect to the private inurement, in that kind of a situation, we could be talking about the loss of tax-exempt status. Or we could be talking about a situation where if there were individuals who were benefiting from the organizations, those individuals could be subject to taxation and they could be subject to penalties based on the benefit that they receive. In the hospital arena, the worst case, if the hospital is found not to be in compliance with the rules, is they can actually lose their tax-exempt status and no longer be treated as a 501c3 organization. In those rules, there's also a provision that allows the IRS to enforce a $50,000 penalty per year if one of the requirements isn't met, which is a requirement that the hospital do a community health needs assessment. That's a formal evaluation of the needs in the community, and it has to be done every 3 years. And if it's not done the way that the regulations indicate it has to be done, the hospital can be subject to that $50,000 penalty. For large organizations, that $50,000 penalty, may not be a huge monetary factor, but for some of the smaller hospitals, that can be a really big impact. So, both monetary and that loss of exempt status.
Wow, it does seem like the penalties could be fairly steep for some organizations. What do exempt organizations need to do to comply?
I think it's really just a matter of operating the way that they're supposed to be operating and really being aware of the purpose for which they were given tax-exempt status, ensuring that they continue to operate for charitable purposes, making sure that if they have transactions with insiders or with other people who could be in positions to influence the organization, to make sure that they're operating those at arm's length in order to avoid that private inurement or those excess benefit penalties that can apply to their insiders. Within the hospital realm, it's really making sure that an organization is aware of the requirements under 501R, making sure that they've got all of the appropriate documents created. And in most cases, those documents are required to be made publicly available. So they're required to be on a hospital's website. And that's one of the main places the IRS goes to start these checks, is they go to the hospital's website to see if they can find the documents they're supposed to be able to find there. So that's an easy way for a hospital to kind of do a self-check, is go out on your website and make sure the documents that are supposed to be available to the public are there. Also making sure that you don't just have policies in place to meet these requirements, but that you're actually looking at the policies and making sure that they're being followed throughout your organization. Because I anticipate that as we move further along with respect to these rules, the IRS isn't just going to be doing compliance checks by looking on a website. They're actually going to be contacting organizations and wanting examples of how they are actually following the rules.
So what can exempt organizations do?
You know, we will often be brought in to help an organization if they're contemplating changes in their operations, if they're contemplating certain transactions where there may be a potential for exposure, to talk through with us what the potential tax implications could be, and then work with them to structure the transactions so that they have the proper documentation in place. Another area that I didn't mention yet, but bears mentioning, is with respect to unrelated business income. We have seen reviews and examinations with respect to Form 990T, which is a taxable form that organizations have to file. And specifically where we're seeing these kinds of examinations is with respect to organizations that are showing losses on their taxable activities. The IRS kind of questions whether those are true losses. So we can get involved in helping an organization look at their cost allocations or look at the activities they're reporting as taxable and ensure that they truly should be reported as taxable. And then in the healthcare arena, we do a lot of compliance checks with our clients where we are reviewing their policies, reviewing their community health needs assessments, actually matching it up to the requirements within the regulations to make sure that everything that's supposed to be in those policies and in those documents is there. And then we can also come in and do some kind of mock audit where we could do a testing to make sure that the policies are actually being followed throughout the organization and are being implemented the way that they're written.
It's nice to know that we're certainly able to serve as a resource for clients who need it. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your expertise, and for everyone else for listening in. Please visit eidbailey.com or contact Kim Hudwardson directly with questions or comments about this session. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss during a future recording, please email nationaltaxoffice@eidbailey.com. We look forward to hearing from you.